year marks the 20th anniversary of the OSCE Action Plan to Combat Trafficking in Human Beings, as well as the anniversary of the establishment of the position of OSCE Special Representative and Coordinator for Combating Trafficking in Human Beings. The Action Plan was a landmark moment, adopted by participating states with the goal of enhancing the OSCE's efforts in fighting trafficking in human beings. So, 2 decades later, where are we? It is estimated that there are some 27 million victims of human trafficking and forced labor globally. That is more victims than at any point in history. Yet, less than 1% of those victims are ever identified. That means less than 1% of victims globally receive the assistance, care, and legal protection that they are entitled to. The exploitation of these 27 million victims generates an estimated $150 billion in profits each year for their traffickers. $150 billion. That figure is higher than the national economies of 33 out of the 57 OSCE participating states. Global prosecution data also shows that human traffickers enjoy widespread impunity. There are only about 10,000 prosecutions of trafficking worldwide every year, which is a drop in the ocean compared to the millions of victims, or rather, I should say half a drop, if you consider that only a few years ago, in 2015, the number of prosecutions was almost twice that, at 19,000. The truth is that 20 years after the action plan, our overall efforts to combat and eventually end human trafficking are not only insufficient, but increasingly insufficient. The scale of the crime has expanded, the nature of the crime has evolved, and our ability and effort to adjust and respond accordingly is lagging behind. The problem here is not the OSCE action plan, which together with its addenda is comprehensive and forward-leaning. The challenge is that collectively we have not committed the necessary political will and leadership to implement the action plan at the necessary scale. Political will is the single most important ingredient for our success. And showcasing and inspiring national leadership will be the aim of this conference over the next 2 days. By attending this Alliance conference, you have chosen to be part of a collective effort to turn the tide, to stay true to our commitments, to confront this violation of human dignity, to move from discussing human trafficking to ending it. It is telling that we have a record number of in-person participants for this year's Alliance and such a diverse representation of stakeholders, from survivors and frontline responders to lawmakers and political figures, from private sector businesses to public sector representatives. This shows a broad willingness and commitment to face the challenge and mobilize leadership across our societies. The first step in this conversation to end human trafficking is to open ourselves to the possibility that we can, in fact, end human trafficking. From the past 20 years, we have some great examples of national, regional, and international responses to combating this heinous crime, responses that have already achieved progress or are poised for impact. And this week, we have convened inspiring national leaders throughout the agenda so that we can hear about these examples and consider their broader application. To paraphrase the motto of our chair in office, leadership is all about people, about choosing hope, about perseverance. At this year's Alliance, you will hear from speakers who have demonstrated this in their countries and who in different ways exemplify the leadership qualities that will help us all achieve impact. Now, before giving the floor to our impressive lineup of opening and keynote speakers who will be addressing you after me, let me just give you a few details about the program of the conference. After the welcoming and keynote addresses, panel 1 will dive deeper into the nature and scale of the problem and explore why strong national leadership is necessary to overcome this challenge. The discussion will cover different forms of exploitation and their manifestations, as well as current trends and patterns. It will also explore gaps in responses across the OSCE region and their consequences. Day 2 will focus on solutions. We will start day 2 with a survivor-led conversation on anti-trafficking leadership, where you will hear directly from men and women who have chosen to share their insights based on their lived experience. We strongly believe in survivor engagement and have this year, for the first time at the Alliance, provided a platform specifically for reflections on the topic of leadership and the way forward for the anti-trafficking movement. This conversation will be followed by panel 2, which will showcase examples of the most effective anti-trafficking systems and structures, the very architecture and necessary building blocks for lasting impact. This is critical. These bedrock structures in each country are needed to effectively combat trafficking in human beings, yet they are not a given, and national leadership is the catalyst to put them into place and ensure their implementation. In panel 3, we will move to look at leading examples of national laws and policies to combat trafficking. This panel will take a closer look at how national leadership can lead to the introduction of game-changing laws, comprehensive anti-trafficking approaches, and action plans, including those that address and capture the scale and evolving nature of the crime. As per OSCE tradition in the program, we have included side events, and this year we have 4 organized by my office and our partners. And they will take place during the lunch break tomorrow between 1300 and 1500. I encourage you all to have a closer look at the program for these side events, as they will supplement our main program with some very interesting, in-depth discussions and examples of excellent anti-trafficking work. Allow me to thank all the panelists and speakers who have agreed to share their expertise in the course of these 2 days. Each of them will offer unique insight and guidance for states to step up their efforts to combat and eradicate human trafficking at the national, regional, and international levels. After each of the thematic panels, panels numbers 1, 2, and 3, we will welcome floor interventions from states, NGOs, international organizations, and others. Floor requests are already quite abundant this year, so I'd like to kindly ask, or even insist, that everyone stick to the 2 minutes that have been assigned to you. If you'd like to take the floor after any of the 3 thematic panels and have not yet notified us, please do flag it to my colleague, Marianne Angvik, who is sitting right behind me and is collecting those requests. Now, let me introduce our first distinguished guest. I am pleased to welcome a champion at the international level for this topic, the OSCE Secretary General Helga Schmid, whose steadfast commitment to raising this issue and to bringing it to the attention of leaders around the OSCE region has been inspiring and welcome. She will give us her welcoming remarks. And Secretary General, great to have you with us. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. Like our special representative just said, it's a real pleasure also for me and for the OSCE to host once again the Alliance Against Trafficking in Persons. This annual conference gathers high-level political representatives, national authorities, international and civil society organizations, trafficking survivors, which is very important, and anti-trafficking grassroots activists. Coming together and joining forces is vital to end trafficking in human beings. The diversity of stakeholders in this room underlines the fact that this crime affects the whole of society and all of our societies. And I'm proud that the OSCE has become a recognized venue and a leader in assisting participating states as you address these challenges. As our special representative mentioned, 23 marks 20 years since the adoption of the OSCE Action Plan on combating trafficking in human beings. We have done a great deal over the years, and combating trafficking remains a top priority for the OSCE. Despite the progress achieved, human trafficking remains a devastating problem, and it is exacerbated by conflict. The war against Ukraine has created the largest displacement of people Europe has seen since World War II, and a humanitarian crisis of historic proportions. 1/3 of the Ukrainian population has been displaced, and it's predominantly women and children. And that displacement and the vulnerability it fosters comes with high risks of exploitation. These circumstances only highlight the urgency of addressing the crime of human trafficking and building robust systems to prevent trafficking in human beings. The elevated risk for exploitation in the OSCE region today means that there is a pressing need and obligation to take action, an obligation that rests with the participating states. Success in tackling human trafficking requires national leadership. You have the power to prioritize the fight against trafficking in human beings. This cannot wait, and it must not be underestimated. And it's not happening somewhere far away. It is in your streets, in your shops, and on your servers that the fight against trafficking must be waged. So I call on you, your capitals, parliaments, to ramp up our activities, to improve policies and legislation, to reform anti-trafficking systems and structures, and to invest more resources. Strong national leadership is essential to overcome the challenges we face. But I'm not talking here about leadership in isolation. Experience has shown that no country can defeat trafficking on its own. This crime is too complex and too diffuse for any one nation to solve it solo. And this is what makes the work of the OSCE in this fight so vital. Our multidimensional approach to security and our experience with both policy and practice means that the OSCE is ideally placed to help you develop effective responses encompassing prosecution, protection, and prevention, and to support the cooperation and connectivity that will amplify, so to say, the success of your efforts. Our organization is a forum where countries of origin, countries of transit, and destination can design common strategies to address all stages of the crime, from recruitment to exploitation. The OSCE can support you in considering the structural aspects of our societies that allow trafficking to thrive. Because tragically, human trafficking is as embedded in our societies, but also in our economies as it has ever been, and it continues to grow. Success in defeating it requires decisive action well beyond traditional criminal justice interventions. In this regard, one crucial concept the OSCE has championed is the notion of broad-based prevention. In particular, if we want to defeat trafficking, we need to stop paying for it. Government, businesses, individuals, we all have a responsibility to ensure our money does not contribute to trafficking through the goods and the services we purchase. And I'm proud to say that the OSCE has taken actions within our own supply chains to achieve this goal. We can support you in this and more, and it is our aim to build on our work through the important conversations we'll have today and tomorrow. The threat posed by human trafficking is real, and so are our prospects for successfully addressing it together, particularly with strong national leadership. So again, I encourage you to take up this charge and go even further in your efforts. We stand ready to support you. In closing, I want to thank the OSCE Office of the Special Representative and Coordinator for combating trafficking in human beings for the tremendous work done over the years. I would also like to thank other executive structures, including field operations and ODIHR, that in cooperation with the Special Representative's Office have greatly contributed to advancing the OSCE anti-trafficking agenda. This is a team effort. And finally, thank you all for joining us for the Alliance Conference. As Val rightly says, the fact that you're here today, it shows that you have chosen to be part of a collective effort. So we have important work to do, and I look forward to our continued cooperation. But I want really to close by expressing my deep, deep felt gratitude to Val Richey for his superb leadership and the tremendous work done by his team, because without you, this would not have been possible, not only today, but also over the past years. Back over to you.
I'm not gone just yet. We have some work to do. Thank you very much, Secretary General, for that strong call to action. And I love the point about cooperation for amplification. That's exactly what the OSCE is about, and I think it's a superb point. So thank you so much. Now to the next speaker in our program, the OSCE Chairperson in Office, Minister of Foreign Affairs of North Macedonia, Minister Bujar Osmani, was unfortunately unable to join us at the last minutes, but we have we're very grateful for and the pleasure of listening to his welcoming remarks online and ICT, if you will, please.
Excellencies, Secretary General, dear Helga, Special Representative Richey. As the OSCE Chairman in Office, I am very pleased to address you at the opening of the 23rd Conference of the Alliance Against Trafficking in Persons. I would have loved to be with you in person, so we could directly engage in discussing effective solutions against trafficking in human beings. Please accept my apologies for not being able to join in, and I wish you a very successful conference. Distinguished participants, it is shocking that even in the 21st century, we are witnessing a rise in modern slavery across the OSCE region. This is a phenomenon that has been troubling us in continuity for years. Today, it is even worse. So we need to all muster on deck to fight this malady. Allow me to thank Special Representative Richey and his office for this smart choice of topic and for bringing national leaders and experts to share their views and perspectives. The interest for the conference and the turnout is impressive. As I was told, a record high number of participants is registered, which one can say clears the optics of the OSCE as an action-oriented and solutions-driven organization. The OSCE we know and we would like to see. The topic is timely and particularly apposite. We are witnessing an unspeakable crisis in the face of Russia's war of aggression against Ukraine. With its severity, it is testing our resilience, our values, and unity. It challenges our vision for the future as well as our response to the consequential challenges, the byproducts of the aggression that the whole OSCE region experiences. To rise to the occasion, we need leadership. On several occasions before, I urged participating states to demonstrate critical responsibility and accountability for one's actions. Leadership presupposes context awareness. The gravity of the moment, the seriousness of our time, calls for responsibility, patience, and wisdom, the vital features of leadership. With each and every one of you attending the conference, being a leader of a kind, I would like to assure you that we will continue to lead this organization resolutely throughout the year without any hesitations. We believe in OSCE's raison d'etre and see great value in its mission. The systemic approach to fight trafficking in human beings and commitment to end modern slavery of this organization is a testimony of OSCE's relevance and reflection of leadership despite the dire circumstances. As chairpersonship, we will continue to promote leadership through inclusivity and involvement of actors across different spectrums of society. Our aim is true, and the inauguration of the Special Representatives for Civil Society and Youth speaks loud in support of this commitment. Fostering a multi-stakeholder approach embraces different perspectives. A set of different approaches would only strengthen our response mechanisms, contribute to good, accountable governance, and overall societal progress. As the list and the profile of participants shows, the set of actors involved in combating trafficking is diverse, and some of the most valuable inputs often come from civil society, academics, and survivors. That being said, in light of the sheer scale of the crime, national leadership is the make or break factor when it comes to achieving far-reaching progress, and it needs to lead, synergize, and catalyze the efforts of others. Let me illustrate North Macedonia's recent acts of leadership against trafficking in human beings. We have made significant achievements on the policy side, such as the adoption of our national strategy and National Action Plan for Combating Trafficking in Human Beings and Illegal Migration 21-25, as well as a National Action Plan for Combating Trafficking of Children 21-25. This ensures that all our national actors are harmonized and deliberate in their response to trafficking, and that their action are duly funded and fit in an overall strategic vision. However, since this is a conversation on leadership, I will be honest with you. There are areas in which my country must also improve. For example, we need to step up our efforts to detect, prosecute, and convict traffickers. And I hope the policies I mentioned earlier can provide the right impetus for that. This is why representatives of North Macedonia are eager to actively participate in the conference over the next 2 days. We are confident that we will gain insight into innovative policies, systems and tools against trafficking, which help us all improve our response. There isn't a single OSCE participating state that has defeated trafficking in human beings. There is a lot to learn here, including from each other, on some of the things that are working well across the OSCE region. In this vein, I ask you all to do the same. Keep an open mind and engage in this discussion. Being stubborn and resistant to new ideas will not help us attain progress in any field, let alone combating trafficking. Humility, proactiveness, and political will are what will get us there. Put simply, we, the participating states, need to step up and act. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, our chairpersonship is people-focused. All our deliberations and concrete engagement are in vain should they not have an effect on the ground, positively impacting lives of ordinary people. Trafficking in human beings is a matter of human security. States have a duty of care to victims and potential victims of this crime. Not only over the next 2 days, but in all our anti-trafficking efforts, let us always keep the people in mind. We must hear their voices and concerns, their hopes and fears. We must put a human face on all our documents, words and deeds. As ODIHR has made clear through their many valuable tools and efforts, our approach must be based on human rights, the rule of law, and non-discrimination. It must promote a victim and survivor-centered, gender-sensitive, and trauma-informed methods to assist victims and survivors of human trafficking. After all, leadership is about empathy and understanding. It's about serving the people who entrusted us to lead. As we continue to navigate through the challenges that lie ahead, let's not forget our motto. It's about people. And let us continue working together to build a brighter future for all. Lastly, in my capacity of chairman, allow me also on behalf of participating states to thank Mr. Richey for his 4 years of service as OSCE Special Representative and Coordinator for combating trafficking in human beings. He and his able team have made an extraordinary contribution to the fight against trafficking and succeeded in raising the profile of the OSCE's anti-trafficking work. Well, you showcased a clear leadership, demonstrating integrity and commitment, leaving your successor big shoes to fill. However, I remain confident that he or she will continue bolstering OSCE's imprint on combating trafficking. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, thank you all for your dedication and for your attention. The last 20 years have been about raising awareness and taking the first steps in our response in terms of combating trafficking. Let the next 20 be about ending this scourge. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister Osmani, for your kind words and for your message to step up and act. I think it's a great message to kick off this conference and start these discussions. And with that, let me now turn to our keynote addresses. We are delighted to have with us a quintessential national anti-trafficking leader, former Prime Minister of the United Kingdom and Member of Parliament, Lady Theresa May. Welcome, Lady May. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Val. And can I add my thanks to the OSCE generally for the focus that you have put on this important issue, but particularly to you, Val, for the work that you have done in ensuring that we raise awareness of the problems of human trafficking and the misery that that brings. And it's a great pleasure to be able to be here in Vienna. I have seen at first hand how the OSCE works to address the most pressing issues of our time, whether that's trafficking, terrorism, human rights, or armed conflict. But more than that, it's an essential component of our multilateral system, the rules-based international order that's fundamental to political stability and our collective security. Bringing together 57 participating countries across 3 continents and representing over 1 billion people. The OSCE's strengths lie not just in the coordination of national policymaking, but in its ability to harness the expertise and experience of wider civic society, agencies, NGOs, charities, the private sector, and academia. Because global challenges require an effort beyond the capabilities of sovereign states alone. And I'm delighted to see that broad representation here today. And I'm looking forward to hearing your perspectives. As we've heard 20 years ago, the Ministerial Council agreed the OSCE Action Plan on combating trafficking in human beings. It was a landmark commitment that has underpinned our ability to coordinate the prevention of trafficking and the protection of victims. And over the last 2 decades, the Alliance Against Trafficking in Persons has played an invaluable role in helping states to translate their objectives into action. We have made enormous progress. But this 20th anniversary reminds us of the scale of the challenge before us. The recent Global Estimates of Modern Slavery report found that there has been an increase of 10 million people being forced to work or marry since 2016. That brings the estimate of people living in modern slavery to 50 million, more than at any other time in human history. Slavery and trafficking are among the largest organized criminal activities in the world. These crimes exist in all of our societies. They respect neither borders nor jurisdictions. Yet compared to other offences, our collective response has been disproportionately weak. And in 2023, we are fighting on several new fronts. We are seeing how crises can dramatically increase vulnerability to exploitation. We need only look at the war in Ukraine, the COVID-19 pandemic, or the direct effects of climate change. And with the widespread adoption of the internet, trafficking is increasingly being enabled and facilitated online. Today, 75% of sex trafficking victims are advertised on the internet. Yet for all the progress we have made, only 14 participating OSCE states have imposed reporting requirements on tech companies. And with increasingly globalized supply chains, the goods and services we consume are more likely than ever to be the product of forced labor. 30 of the OSCE's participating states have public procurement policies in place to reduce the risk of trafficking in supply chains. But that's still only just over half of all OSCE countries. And only 16 of our 57 states have gone further, introducing laws that require businesses to act responsibly across their supply chains. It's clear that more action is needed. At a national level, our anti-trafficking responses can be stronger. Having a position statement or policy is one thing, but enforceable legislation quite another. As the UK's Home Secretary, I introduced the first piece of legislation of its kind in Europe, the Modern Slavery Act. It is more than a deterrent. It has become a vital policing tool to stop known perpetrators of trafficking from travelling freely across borders. It has delivered tough penalties and put slave drivers behind bars. It has enhanced the protection and support given to victims. And it placed a world-leading obligation on businesses to demonstrate that modern slavery is not taking place in their supply chains. But legislation is only half the story. For laws to be effective, governments must support their implementation with practical mechanisms which identify and support victims. Ultimately, this activity has to be prioritised through national budgets. And perhaps most valuable of all, it requires the investment of political capital. At the UN General Assembly in 2017, I launched the UN call to action to end forced labour, modern slavery and human trafficking by 2030. We committed to implement national strategies and called for more cooperation between countries on law enforcement and the protection of the most vulnerable. We still have a long way to go if we are to meet our target. But the call to action demonstrated the broad support that existed across the international community to bring this exploitation to an end. It received the endorsement of over 90 countries, from Norway to Bahrain to South Korea. It established international momentum building on the UN's Sustainable Development Goals. And over the last 6 years, we have made steady progress. But the striking acceleration in slavery and trafficking shows that steady progress is not enough. There is an urgent need to scale up investment and action, and that requires greater political leadership. It's clear to me that to achieve greater momentum at a political level, we need to raise the profile of this challenge. That's why last year I commissioned the UK's Modern Slavery and Human Rights Policy and Evidence Centre to examine the case for establishing a global commission on human trafficking and modern slavery. The team carrying out the study met with more than 50 organisations working to address modern slavery across the world. That included governments, intergovernmental bodies, civil society organisations, human rights groups, survivors and businesses. And the message from the study was clear. Despite global agreement on eradicating modern slavery by 2030, there is a widespread sense that political momentum has been lost. The study concluded that there is a compelling need for a global commission to provide greater political leadership. And I can confirm today that it is my intention to provide the leadership to bring together the coalition required to establish such a commission. It will have 3 clear objectives. Firstly, to provide leadership and visibility at the highest ranks of international politics, working with the most senior decision makers to catalyse action. Secondly, to mobilise the evidence base needed to spur political action within and between states. And thirdly, to amplify existing international collaborations to maximise their impact. And over the coming months, we will seek to bring together influential figures of renown from politics, civil society, business and academia. It will be led by high-profile commissioners from across the world who have the stature to help restore lost momentum. And people with lived experience will be central to the work of the Commission. We're having conversations with several countries that are prepared to act as co-conveners, and I would like to extend the invitation to everyone here today to be involved through the organisations or governments that you represent. Because governments acted in the centuries before us to condemn slavery to the history books, but contrary to popular belief, it remains a daily reality for 50 million men, women and children. Where there were once chains and shackles, today there is deception, fear and coercion. It hides in plain sight in our everyday lives, in our workplaces, in the goods we buy, the food we eat, and in the services we consume. Because slavery is an insidious crime that knows no geographical boundaries, a global epidemic to which no country is immune. And in epidemics, each of us must act to effect systemic change. For too long, we have allowed those who trade in human misery to prosper. So 20 years on from the OSCE Action Plan, let us recommit ourselves to this task, to provide stronger leadership in addressing the greatest human rights issue of our time. Let's match our words with action. Thank you.
Thank you, Lady May, for your powerful words and call for action, as well as your contributions to the field over the last years. I think the key sentence that I heard there is the scale up. And the second piece was that scaling up requires leadership. And that is the prevailing message of this conference, the need to scale up, and that scaling up requires leadership. So with that, we turn to our second keynote, delivered by a representative of a country that has indeed demonstrated such leadership over recent years. Mr. Alimov, Chair of the Committee on International Relations, Investments, and Tourism of the Senate of the Republic of Uzbekistan. Thank you so much for joining us. Mr. Alimov, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Your Excellencies, the Chairman, Mr. Valiant Richey, dear Ms. Helga Schmid, ladies and gentlemen, first of all, let me express my sincere gratitude for this opportunity to speak to the event. It is indeed a high privilege to present visions and proposals of Uzbekistan on this extraordinary significant issue. Dear colleagues, certainly human trafficking as a global challenge affects the lives of hundreds of thousands of people around the world. The international community is taking effective measures to fight this negative phenomenon. A number of conceptual documents, programs, action plans have been adopted within the framework of international structures. In this regard, we highly appreciate measures taken by United Nations, OSCE, International Labour Organization, International Organization for Migration, and other global institutions. Because of global trends in human trafficking observed in recent years, the approaches and priorities of Republic of Uzbekistan have been completely revised and improved in the following directions. The first, strengthening the institutional framework. The National Commission on Combating Human Trafficking and Forced Labor, headed by the Chairperson of Senate, Upper Chamber of Parliament of Uzbekistan, Madam Tanzila Narbayeva, has been functioning since 2019 to coordinate activities of all ministries and agencies in this area and constantly engage with representatives of civil society and international organizations as well. The institution of the National Rapporteur on Combating Human Trafficking and Forced Labor was established. Second direction, the improvement of national legislation. In recent years, about 40 legal acts have been adopted in the sphere of combating forced labor and human trafficking. A number of conventions and protocols of the International Labour Organization and the International Organization for Migration have been ratified. A new version of law on combating human trafficking was adopted. The criminal responsibility for child and forced labor was more enforced. National referral mechanism for victims of human trafficking was developed with the support of OSCE, ODIHR. The third direction, developing international cooperation. With support of international organizations, we take measures to raise public awareness on combating human trafficking. The abolishment of boycott of Uzbek cotton by Cotton Campaign became clear evidence of effectiveness. The large-scale reforms in our country. Moreover, in recent years, Uzbekistan improved its rankings in the annual trafficking reports of the U.S. State Department. These results, of course, are the results of strategy of new Uzbekistan by the President Shavkat Mirziyoyev, and as well as the activity of National Commission for Combating Forced Labor. Dear colleagues, Uzbekistan appreciates cooperation with the OSCE as a unique international platform for enhancing dialogue and all relevant issues on security and sustainable development. OSCE Office of the Special Representative and Coordinator for Combating Human Trafficking plays key role in implementing systemic measures to solve this global problem. We have a fruitful cooperation. Last year, with the support and participation of OSCE Special Representative Mr. Valiant Richey, in Uzbekistan was started a pilot simulation training on combating human trafficking, and high-level international conference was organized. Together with the OSCE, successfully implemented a joint project on supporting the further development of the national institutional framework to combat human trafficking, which was included to the roadmap on cooperation between Uzbekistan and OSCE for the period of 2021 and 2022. We also have several projects in this direction in our new roadmap to the period of 2023-2024, and we very appreciate it. In order to be concrete and in order to achieve the goals of OSCE priorities in this sphere, Uzbekistan proposes following. First, to develop and implement new projects in the fields of prevention of victims of human trafficking. Second proposal is to develop a regional program to combat human trafficking in Central Asia countries, which could provide regional trainings for law enforcement agencies and formulate a new actual recommendations. In conclusion, I would like to thank the OSCE, personally Secretary General, and the OSCE Special Representative on Combating Human Trafficking for continuous support of democratic reforms of Uzbekistan. In Uzbekistan, your recommendations and support undoubtedly will lead to ensuring the fundamental rights and freedoms of our citizens. We are ready for further dialogue and cooperation, and wish fruitful 2 days work to our conference. Thank you for attention.
Thank you, Mr. Alimov, and thank you for outlining the really comprehensive overhaul that Uzbekistan undertook of its institutions and its policy framework and engaging civil society to accomplish what I think is a really remarkable achievement, which is the lifting of the cotton boycott. I think this is an outstanding example of national leadership and something that can be quite inspirational. So thank you for outlining that, and congratulations to the country for its accomplishments. Our final keynote will be delivered by my good friend and, shall I say, collaborator, the Special Representative of the United Nations Secretary General on Sexual Violence and Conflict, Ms. Pramila Patten. Ms. Patten, pleasure to have you with us. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Val. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I commend the OSCE for its important contributions in combating human trafficking over the past 2 decades. This conference is taking place at a critical time when trafficking in persons is flourishing, with important deficits in tackling it persisting. Prevention measures are limited and often ineffective, while impunity prevails. A recent UNODC's global report reveals that the number of victims of trafficking for the purpose of sexual exploitation detected globally fell by 24% in 2020, while the number of convictions fell by 27%. This global business involving human goods has now reached dimensions comparable to those of the illicit trade in drugs and weapons. While human trafficking occurs in almost every country in the world, it takes on particularly abhorrent dimensions during and after conflict. It violates human rights and undermines national and international security through its links to organized crime and corruption. Women and girls, particularly those who are displaced, are disproportionately affected by trafficking in person for the purpose of sexual exploitation. And we see how the war in Ukraine, with its unprecedented refugee crisis, both in time and scale, has increased vulnerability to trafficking inside and outside of Ukraine. It is commendable that many governments, regional and international organizations have taken robust initial measures to welcome refugees and offer support and assistance to meet their immediate needs. While the regular migration scheme offered by the EU, for example, to Ukrainian citizens may reduce the vulnerability to trafficking as compared to 2014, the risk that this humanitarian crisis turns into a human trafficking crisis with an unprecedented number of victims remains high if more risk mitigation measures are not put in place. Scarcity of data should in no way be taken to indicate a lack of criminal activity, especially for human trafficking, which often deprives its victims of voice and agency and reduces capacity for detection. Earlier migration crises have demonstrated how criminal groups or individuals take advantage of large flows of people to exploit the most vulnerable in transit and destination countries. For traffickers and predators, this war is not a tragedy, but an opportunity. I went to Ukraine twice in the past year. I also visited a number of refugee-receiving countries, from Poland to Moldova, Latvia, and Estonia, where I saw how the response is uneven. For example, I visited reception and transit centers in Poland and Moldova, where the majority of the refugees are living with host communities, and saw grave security and protection concerns in these facilities run by volunteers with only a bare-bone presence of UN agencies. The lack of oversight of accommodation offers, the multiplicity of actors volunteering to provide services with little or no training or experience in supporting victims of trafficking or persons at risk of trafficking are a serious concern. The reality is that many refugee-receiving countries are overwhelmed and need support to be able to allocate sufficient resources for the responses. While primary responsibility for combating trafficking rests with the state, humanitarian actors must also play an important role. A comprehensive and well-coordinated counter-trafficking strategy involving all sectors and actors, including the authorities, should form part of the protection response. Given the challenges of this transnational organized crime and the complex nature and multiple dimensions of human trafficking, the anti-human trafficking response requires an integrated and holistic response, a concerted cross-border response by humanitarian partners, law enforcement agencies, border forces, immigration officials, and political leaders. I'm happy to report that during my visit to Ukraine last year in May, I signed a framework of cooperation with the government of Ukraine to support their efforts in a number of priority areas, including prevention of trafficking inside and outside of Ukraine. And the technical support being provided includes awareness raising and training of military personnel, border guards, police and immigration officials, and include engagement with neighboring and refugee receiving countries, as well as regional institutions. While I welcome the attention given to trafficking in the context of the war in Ukraine, I urge the international community to do more to prevent trafficking in all conflicts. The war in Ukraine is far from being the only situation in the world putting women and children at risk of sexual exploitation and trafficking in human beings. In the Sahel, the trafficking of women and girls, both by armed groups and organized criminal groups and networks, is a well-documented reality. In Libya, an important hub in the migration route to Europe, patterns of conflict-related sexual violence, including sexual exploitation and forced prostitution, continue to be perpetrated against women and girls. In other conflict zones, countless stories of women and girls abducted and raped by parties to the conflict or compelled to exchange sexual services for food, shelter, protection, or safe passage are being documented. In the last decade, conflict-related trafficking for the purpose of sexual violence gained particular visibility as a feature of the modus operandi of terrorist groups like Boko Haram and Daesh. And as you know, these groups continue to be active in Nigeria and in other parts of Africa, using the threat of and proceeds from trafficking to advance their strategic objectives and to finance their operations. Yet the normative framework regarding the link between sexual violence in conflict and trafficking for sexual purposes is robust, with the adoption of Security Council Resolution 2331, which called for decisive and immediate action to prevent, criminalize, investigate, prosecute, and ensure accountability of those who engage in trafficking in persons. Resolution 2331 recognized the extreme trauma experienced by the victims of trafficking and the importance of assistance and services for their physical, psychological, and social recovery, rehabilitation, and reintegration. Ladies and gentlemen, the challenge before us is how to close the gap between commitments and compliance and turn resolutions into solutions. Security Council Resolution 2331 and international law cannot be an empty promise. We must also use this moment to recommit ourselves to the principles enshrined in the OSCE Action Plan. We must prevent trafficking by reducing vulnerabilities. We must protect victims by strengthening identification and reporting mechanisms and provide direct assistance to all victims in a gender, age, and child-sensitive manner. We must prosecute perpetrators and have in place robust anti-trafficking legislation. Trafficking in human beings will continue to be a low-risk and highly profitable business in the absence of proper legislation. We must partner for change. The multifaceted nature of trafficking in human beings requires political and operational coordination and cooperation at national, regional, and international levels. Ladies and gentlemen, last but not least, if we are to address the complex problem of conflict-related trafficking, we should not lose sight of the crime itself. Too often it goes undetected and undeterred. To a chilling effect, trafficking in person for sexual exploitation remains an underground crime against a perceived underclass of victims. To address it, the issue must be visible and on the radar of law enforcement authorities. The way we view the issue also matters, and I will leave you with three critical lenses. The first is a gender lens. Even if we dismantle the criminal networks and brothels, deter demand and arrest the perpetrators, unless there are educational opportunities and viable economic alternatives, women and girls will always be at heightened risk. The one constant in human trafficking is poverty, which has a female face. We will never break the vicious cycle of gender-based violence and exploitation without prioritizing the economic empowerment of women. The second consideration is that we cannot be conflict blind. From Ukraine to Myanmar and elsewhere, we see that women and girls comprise the vast majority of civilians forcibly displaced by war, who flee with nothing more than the clothes on their backs and the belongings they can carry by hand. Women's physical security and economic security are indivisibly linked, with conflict dynamics compounding economic desperation. The third lens is that of the survivor. Survivor engagement is essential, as they know firsthand the tactics traffickers use, including online, the obstacles survivors face, and what works to support socioeconomic reintegration. Ladies and gentlemen, there are too many victims who are robbed of their basic dignity and rights. Although this historical moment is fraught and complex, I firmly believe that we can change that reality. We must firmly address the inequality, poverty, and insecurity that forge the chains of human trafficking and break them through a gender and age-responsive, survivor-centered response. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Patten, and thank you for your leadership at the global level on these issues. Your discussion of exacerbating circumstances like conflict is really, I think, critical to our efforts to reduce risk and mitigate vulnerability. And your call for investment and coordinated response to turn commitment into action, I think, is critical for this conversation and sets us off on the right tone for this conference. With this, ladies and gentlemen, we get to enjoy one of the great pleasures of the in-person Alliance Conference, which is the coffee break. This is a chance when, as you all know, you get to see old friends, you get to make new partners, you get to talk about this issue and engage and learn. And you will now have that opportunity for the next 30 minutes because we are perfectly on schedule. For those connected online, please stay connected. Do not leave the session or you will have to go back through the process of getting back, which is much harder the second time, I assure you. We will be back in half an hour at 1600 to dive into the topic and look at the nature and scope of the problem we are facing so that tomorrow we can talk about what to do about it. The coffee break will take place here on the second floor in the cafeteria that you passed to enter this room. Thank you so much. Thank you to our opening speakers and our keynote speakers. And I'll see you in 30 minutes.